And do you talk about the sandwich generation?
We do because it's such an interesting place to be. I myself am in the sandwich generation. And even so, like with my grandparents and having to help take care of them as well. Um, and I think it's a really hard position to be in because so many people look to you for guidance on what to do. And it's tough, especially when you're raising young kids.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. And I'm here with Crista Hernandez. Did I pronounce it correctly? Hermance. And she has a law practice out in California, Ventura, and I think you have multiple locations.
Yeah.
But Crista, I found you on TikTok. I've been following you and your content. And what drew me to your content most was you promote yourself as the estate planning mom. And that, for many people, they feel like estate planning, I'm too young to be thinking about this.
Yeah.
But you really lean into it. So please share with us your story and how you got to this topic.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Niki. I appreciate being here. So I started my own estate planning practice almost 10 years ago now. I was a new mom. And as I was working on plans for people, it really got me thinking that, you know, why don't people that are my age that have young kids actually put legal plans in place, right? Because you see accidents that happen all the time, or somebody gets cancer and they're young and they die, that it really got me thinking. And so as I was starting my firm, was really, working in my age bracket and just really trying to educate people. And I kind of got known in my daughter's playgroup circle as the estate planning mom. And so it just kind of clicked to me. And it's like, this is what I should do, is I should focus on educating families on how they can plan for families with young kids. And that's where we started. And so for me, social media has been such a great platform because whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, it's an opportunity to be able to share real life stories on things that if you don't have plans in place, this is what could potentially happen. Or by having these plans, this is how you make sure your family and your kids are protected.
Well protected. And it's interesting for families, young families, they're already overwhelmed, right? Just getting past the wedding and then the children in the house and the crib and to be able to start thinking about, oh, well, what if I'm not here tomorrow?
Yeah.
Like that could be a game stopper. So in your playgroups, you became the estate planning mom. Did you find your friends that you were making that they were a little shy about asking you about these conversations?
I think in general, people just don't want to talk about it, right? You never want to think about not being there with your kids. And, that is one of the hardest parts of estate planning when it comes to families with minor kids. But the fact that you don't do that is what makes it so much worse, that if something were to happen, you have no idea who would be there to raise your kids. And you have a court making that decision without any input from you. And so what I have found is that most people don't want to think about it. So talking to me about it was definitely a challenge. But then on the other side of that, I have parents coming up to me and saying, this is something that I wake up at night thinking about, and it keeps me up and it stresses me out and I don't know what to do. So it's kind of on both sides of that, right? They know they need to do something and they're concerned. But on the same side, they don't want to talk about it.
And as a lawyer, what do you feel are to open up these conversations? What is a way to have people start to think about, if I'm not here tomorrow, what are some of those risks that a young family or parents with, and I'm thinking about situations like there could be, maybe the parents are not married,
Mm-hmm.
but they share custodialship, or it might be a generational family where the grandparents might be raising the child because either the mother or father are not involved. So how do you break it down where people can do a step-by-step analysis of what to do next?
Well, I think that from a law firm perspective, we really try and make the experience as easy as possible for clients. We don't want to get stuck in the feelings of you dying, right? We don't want to dredge on that because, in all reality, that's what you're getting to. But we can talk about it in a way that all we're doing is putting a plan in place, right? And really just trying to keep it as easy as possible where they're not really dwelling on these things. And I find that if we just do it like a plan, like let's just get this checklist done, we keep it very business like because I don't want there to be so much emotion that it's that they can't move forward with it because I've had families like that before. You know, one of the parents, they can't and they start having anxiety and these panic attacks when it comes to it and they can't move forward. And so it's really trying to understand from a client's perspective where they're having issues and try and help them to get around those issues. Whether it's, you know, for a lot of times, if it's maybe they can't agree on guardianship, right? This is one of the things that I see the parents want different guardians. And so it's trying to work through by having a conversation with them and basically counseling them on, well, what are the things that we can do to try and put some type of plan together? Whether it's, you know, naming one as a primary, having one as a backup, taking things into consideration such as age, location, you know, age of the guardian, how well do they know the family or the guardians. And so by working through that, it's really just kind of taking it step by step, right? Kind of each just getting through each different part of an estate plan.
That decision-making process, which can be overwhelming. And then even in my final playbook, we talk about that 10 reasons why people avoid building out this plan. And you're mentioning it. One is that there's a lot of decisions that need to be made, considerations, but by not making a decision ends up causing a great risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about some terminology here. One word is guardianship versus custodialship. Can you explain that to us,
So
please?
guardianship is going to be more of a court proceeding. Custodial, I would generally find in dealing with financial accounts like bank accounts, you'll see custodial accounts in there. It also might be state specific. So in California, which is where I'm licensed to practice, we use guardianship when it comes to petitioning the court for either custody of a child or custody of their property rights, right? Like if they were to inherit assets like a life insurance from a parent, that would be guardianship of their property, not necessarily of their person. And so that's usually where you would see guardianship come up. However, there may be states that use custodial. It might also have something to do with more of a family law topic where it's somebody that has custodial rights over a child. Maybe if one family, the parents couldn't necessarily support the kids for some specific reason, and maybe grandparents were now stepping in, there might be some type of custodial relations in that sense.
Even just that alone, it's like, how do you how do you navigate that, right? So let's talk about that age piece, because I get a little, yes, 18 is of that legal age,
Mhm.
but I was 21 when my mother
Mm,
passed.
I'm sorry.
And there was a trust because they didn't want all the money just to be provided for me right away. So there was a trust that had very specific milestone dates when I could receive X amount of
Yep.
dollars throughout. So in building out an estate plan, just because you have a child that's over 18 doesn't necessarily that mean that they should just, if something happens, they just become the executor of the state.
Mhm.
They should have power of attorney. How do you navigate, or how do you advise your clients from an age standpoint?
Well, it really depends on when we're working with the clients, how old their kids are at the time. And so, to give you like vast differences, is we have parents that are coming in that maybe just had their first child. And so they're under a year old and they're planning on having more children. So, at that point, we don't really know what the child is going to be like, right? We don't know if the kids are going to be responsible with money, if they're going to have any type of things that we wouldn't want them to receive money at 18. And so, in a general, sense, we go through and have a conversation to say, okay, well, assuming all is well with the child, at what ages would you want them to receive that money? And a lot of times, the families that I've worked with will take into how they handle money, right? And how they were as a child and a young adult. And that's where it comes from. It's, at 18, I couldn't be able to handle if I came into this kind of money, or I'm just barely turning 35 and I barely have it together, and so they take into account things that they've gone through. And then we'll set up just, like you had for in your mom's trust, for you, it's at stated ages, right? So generally we would say a portion, let's just say a third at 25, a third at 30, and then the rest at 35, right? Where we can get into some more advanced planning that makes it so they can't have any of those access. They can't have any of the money at the ages that we said, but maybe they can get access for specific needs, right? So it keeps the money a little bit more protected against creditors if they were to get married, so they can't commingle those funds. If there was some type of action, like a creditor action brought against them, the money would stay protected. And those are things that we help families come up with. So on the other side of it is, if we have families with young kids where they don't really know how the kids are, then we have kids that are maybe almost to adults or maybe young adults. And then the parents that know the kids can say, okay, this kid is really good with money. Let's make the age that they can receive it at this age. Or this one is not as responsible, so let's make it this way for them. And then I have some families that say, you know what, when they turn 18, they get all of it. I don't want to be in control of it. I don't want to be managing it from the grave, is what they've said. And then on the other side of it is, well, at the same point, I don't want my kids to be fighting if one gets money. And so I'm just going to say, after so many years of the passing, everybody gets their money, right? So that there isn't that animosity between the siblings.
So what you're describing, and just to roll back our conversation a little bit, is the difference between a will and a trust, right? Because some people say, oh, I have a will.
Yeah.
And my response to them is, if you have young children or children under, I say 21,
Yeah.
then you should probably have a trust.
Yeah.
And I realize that there has to be some educational points there. So I'm going to let you take this opportunity to explain.
Okay. So the difference between a will and a trust. So a will is a legal document where it allows you to say, if I were to pass away, here's how I want my assets distributed, and here's who I want to be guardians for my minor children. When somebody passes away, that is when a will actually comes into play. It is filed with the probate court and thereby goes through that probate proceeding to be able to distribute the assets. A will is not a power of attorney. A will is not a trust. So if somebody gets sick, right, and I see this with clients where in the sandwich generation, and I think we'll probably talk a little bit about that because I think it's so important. Somebody would come to me, an adult child, and their parents have dementia, and they need to sell the family home to be able to afford to put them in an assisted living facility. However, the parents only ever got a will, and they do not have the ability with a power of attorney or a trust to be able to now sell that home. And so now there's going to be what's called a conservatorship hearing that would be needed. And so a will, I think a lot of times when people just have a will, it gives them this false sense of security that that's all they need. But in all reality, a will only comes into play when somebody dies, and it's just telling the court how to distribute the assets.
So what happens if the parents die intestate without a
Then
will
it
and they have young children?
then it just is distributed according to the state's plan for them, right? In legal terms, we call it intestate succession. And it's basically, what does your family tree look like at the time of your passing? And there's a bunch of different ways to look at it. But I will tell you, it is not always, if you are married, your spouse gets everything. And there's a lot of legal battles where people think this is going to happen and it doesn't. We have to file petitions with the court when people think this is going to happen and then somebody dies. And now the kids are getting 2/3 of the house that mom's lived in her whole life. And we now have to go to court and ask the court to approve that no, mom should actually get all of the house. Right. And so there's a lot of things that can happen as a result of not planning ahead of time.
Well, let's talk about that sandwich generation, because I think that is becoming more and more common.
Mhm.
I think you shared the story that you yourself are in that
I
sandwich
am in the
generation.
sandwich
So
generation. Yes.
make that definition of be clear that this sandwich generation, I'll let you share your experience,
Yeah.
your story.
So the sandwich generation is when somebody as an adult has young kids that they are taking care of, and it might not be so young, they might be almost to adulthood or even college age kids. And then when they also have their parents that they are now having to do stuff for. I am at the point in my sandwich generation where it was young kids, my mom that I need to help, and in addition, my grandfather that needed assistance. And so I had lots of generations on top that I was having to do a lot for, right? To be able to provide support and guidance and do a lot of things. And it's draining, right? Especially as a parent with young kids, we see this all the time where clients will come in and they're in this phase that when they're starting to do their estate plan, it's like, okay, well, now I have my parents that also need to get their plan in place because I know that I'm the one who's going to have to deal with it and go through probate court. And I do not want to have to deal with that.
Oh, time and money. Anytime, I mean, people, I try to warn people, if you hear the word probate, it's going to cost you time, money, and stress, right?
Yeah.
And not to have your documents well organized can just prolong the experience.
Mhm.
And I would say California is probably more complicated, one of the more complicated states.
It is definitely one of the more complicated. We're up there with New York, though, so we're not by ourselves. And it's expensive. It's expensive all over. Just to give you an idea of probate fees in California, if you have an estate that has a fair market value of $500,000, and in California, I mean, that's not even a house at this point, right? But a $500,000 estate, and that's a fair market value. It's not how much equity is in the home, it's how much it would actually sell for. The probate fees are $26,000 to go through probate court. And that's just the statutory fees, right? It's set by statute. So you have petition filing fees, bond fees, publication fees, probate referee fees, bond services, it's another 2 to 3 thousand. It's almost $30,000 for a $500,000 estate, and it just goes up from there, right? It's very high.
I'm like, how do you stop that roller coaster, that snowball of expenses
Mhm.
when, my mother just died. I'm trying to mourn my mother passing. And yet I am now faced with all of this administrative work because she did not plan correctly. Or my husband, who I just lost to cancer, and I have young children, and we're trying to support my young children as a new widow, but I still have all these administrative pieces. So that's the urgency. That's the conversation to kind of get people to be proactive.
Yeah, I had a client that called after her mom had just died, and she, I'll never forget this conversation. She said, I'm so angry. I'm so angry at my mom that she didn't have any of these decisions made and she didn't have any of this planning done. And now all I have to do is paperwork and make these decisions. And I can't just be sad my mom just died. And, it's, it was so impactful to me because it's now I just want to share that with people, right? By doing an estate plan, you are able to take that burden off of your family, right? Like you said, the young mom that her husband dies of cancer, it happens, right? We see it in our line of work. And to be able to take that burden of stuff that isn't going to have to get done from an administrative perspective and make it easier on them in a time when they literally can't do anything, it's the best that you can do for them, right?
And just trying to encourage people that do it while before the diagnosis, before the accident, right? Before life happens, because life will happen, whether it's for yourself or your loved ones. So, can you walk us through if I had a client that I referred to you?
Hmm.
What is this? What and they have, let's say the scenario is single mom, husband, or the not the husband, single mom, father, biological father is estranged. They have a 10-year-old child, and she's just barely making ends meet. But because she's in her mid 50s, um, she wants to make sure the child is well taken care of, but is overwhelmed with life in general. To get her to come to you, what are some steps that she can take to start to reduce that anxiety and move forward in building a plan?
Um, I think given this situation, I think just starting is going to probably be a huge relief and just knowing that there is a light at the end of that tunnel. given the facts that you just told me, single mom with a 10-year-old child, estranged father at this point, I would generally recommend a trust-based plan, a comprehensive estate plan. It's going to include a trust document, and a trust is, it's a legal agreement where you, as the creator of the trust, are putting specific instructions to be carried out after you pass away. A living trust or revocable living trust or living trust or just trust. Those are all the same terms that mean the same thing. Okay. And this living trust allows you to be able to say, if something happened to me, whether I got sick or passed away, I know that my instructions are in there to be carried out to help take care of my 10-year-old child at this point. I think a trust is really important here because there's probably going to be something, hopefully, like a life insurance policy that she wouldn't necessarily want to list the minor child on as a beneficiary because minor children cannot inherit money or property. And so that life insurance policy would then have to go through probate court or go through guardianship hearing to be able to be put in a blocked account for the benefit of that child. And that's probably not what mom's intention is when having a life insurance policy, right? She would want that to be there to be able to take care of her child. And so by having a trust, instead of listing the child as a beneficiary, or even worse, listing a sibling or a grandparent or somebody that is supposed to be taking care of child, because once that money goes to them, it's no longer child's, right? And what if they have a creditor issue? Or what if the sibling commingles those funds and puts it in her joint checking account and then she gets divorced and now they get half, right? Or that,
Oh,
and then they get that money goes to her family's estate, right? So please don't do that and try and not have an estate plan and just figure out beneficiaries. That is not the way to go. But by having a trust, you could put your trust as the beneficiary on the life insurance policy. So now you have this written agreement that says if something happens to me, the money from my life insurance is going to go into my trust for the benefit of my child, right? This is also a really big one because of the dad that is not around, right? If dad gets custody of the child, which is depending on the facts, is potential that it could happen, then guess who's getting guardianship of the money? It's dad. And so, in a way to protect it, by putting it into the trust at your passing, it's now in there according to your instructions, and you get to choose who's in charge of it, right? So, a trust is a really big one in this one because I think it's going to provide mom with a lot of that relief in knowing that the child is going to be protected if something happens to her.
now I'm thinking of one client that I have, and I think her response would be, I don't have anything, right? She rents, living, hand to mouth, basically. She's just trying to survive.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when we share about not having a plan for her 10-year-old child, like that to me is a risk as well. So if she has maybe a small life insurance policy from her current employer, but that could change, the employer can change on a different basis. What is your recommendation there for people who say, oh, I don't have anything, so it doesn't matter. Why bother having a will or trust?
A will would allow guardian nomination, which is another really important aspect of it, right? So if she didn't say who she would want, then it's who's petitioning the court for custody, whether it's biological father or somebody from her family. The judge has no input from her as to who she would want in that situation.
And leaving it to chance that, oh, well, my family, my siblings will take care of the aunts and uncles will take care of the child. No, it really does need to be documented in such a way that it's clear. So if the father does start to come back in because he smells money, I mean, some people have different
Actually,
intentions,
yeah.
but that doesn't necessarily mean the child's going to be well taken care of.
Mhm.
Strong encouragement there. So you've been a lawyer for you've been in your practice for how long now?
I think almost 13 years.
And how have you seen the process of estate planning change over the last few years, especially now in this digital space that we're walking into?
I find that more people are more knowledgeable that they need something, not necessarily that they've moved forward, but that it is something that they need. Because anybody over the age of 18 needs some type of estate planning documents, whether it's a will, a trust, guardian nomination, power of attorney, advanced healthcare directive. If you have kids that are going away to college, they need some documents, right? Because you lose all access to be able to make financial decisions and healthcare decisions or know anything if something were to happen to them. So everybody needs something if they are over the age of 18. I think from a technology perspective, it's a lot easier to do planning online. And sometimes the planning online plans that I've seen are not bad. Where I find that I've had clients that have had difficulty with it is they have no incentive to finish it because it's just something they do on their own. Right. When we have taxes due, we have a tax deadline. And so we know we have to get this done. But if it's just something they're doing on their own, they don't have anybody holding them accountable to actually doing it. We're hiring an estate planning professional is going to, go through that process with them and give them that timeline. I've also seen it where sometimes the language is a bit confusing, right? And so people don't really understand what role they're putting into these specific roles. And they may come out with a plan that doesn't actually fit with what they want because, again, it's easy and it's inexpensive. I had a plan that the dad did his plan online and he was in his 70s, and his son came to me after dad died and brought me his trust. And as I'm reviewing it, I look at the last page and dad never signed it, right? So it
Oh,
wasn't a valid trust. And this was, I think he had about $3 million in his estate. So we had to go through probate court because there was not a valid trust. And at that point, it was, that again, that false sense of security by thinking, oh, like I did it online. My family's protected. I'm good. But it wasn't. And they spent, I think, over upwards of almost $50,000 on fees. So there's, I think, a lot that can happen where people can take advantage if they understand what they're doing to get those plans in place at a lower cost. But then there's that other side where by doing it and knowing that it's right when it's not actually right is going to cost so much more money in the
right.
end, right? It's shortcuts, right? It's, well, I don't need an estate plan because I'm just going to have beneficiary designations. Okay, well, people don't understand that when you have a beneficiary designation, if you get sick, your beneficiary doesn't get your money, right? It's only once you die. So if they need money to pay nursing care cost or your mortgage, nobody can access that money. You got to go to court and get a court order.
Right, because they didn't have that power of attorney, durable power of attorney, medical advance directives,
Yep.
and all of those pieces that the lawyer yourself and your team provides that service as well as education to let people know that. I just want to take a step back. You said at the age of 18, you honestly believe that by the time you're 18, that is like you start paying your taxes and you're part of that adulting process,
Yeah.
you're adding this to the checklist.
Yes. So I actually have the college safeguard system that's it's a digital plan. A lot of ours are clients that have kids that went away and are concerned. And so this is how it was created. And so, because I had a client, her son was sent to the hospital and he was in Texas and at school and he was unconscious. She called the hospital and she couldn't get any information. She had no idea what was going on because he had none of these forms signed giving her authorization to talk to them. And so, once a child turns 18 years old, a power of attorney, an advanced healthcare directive, a HIPAA authorization, 3 documents that allow you that if something happened, you can jump in, you can know what's going on, you can make decisions.
That's something they didn't tell us when we were sending our kids off to college.
Yeah.
That's very highlighted. Wanted to call that out. And the only way you're going to do this documentation is to face this conversation,
Hmm.
right? We're all going to die at some point. Life happens, but better to put a plan in place. Now let's talk about the iteration of that plan, right? So what is your recommendation? And let me just share that my husband and I, this whole project started because back in summer of 2023, we realized that we had not updated our wills since our kids were in high school.
Hmm.
Now they were in their 30s.
Hmm.
We're grandparents.
Yeah.
And then we started to navigate through the document again and designating executors, power of attorney. But we waited too long. I know we did.
Yeah.
What's your recommendation? How often should people be updating and what events should trigger an update on their will or trust?
So generally, it really depends on how old you are, right? So for some of our younger clients, they might wait 10 years. For some of our older clients, it might be 3 to 5 years, right? That you need to review it. I think of it like just with taxes, like you should just review like a summary every year just to make sure everybody's still in the right places you want them. It's same thing with beneficiary designations. I can't tell you how many cases I've had in the last 2 years where we have to go to court because somebody doesn't put a beneficiary designation on their retirement account, right? And so, just checking beneficiary designations and making sure those are accurate. But if there is one of these substantial events, death, divorce, a birth, or somebody moves away or somebody gets sick, okay, those are the things that the agents that you have in your documents, you need to make sure. Has anybody gone through any of these five, right? If so, do we need to make any changes? And then update the plan accordingly. And that's the great thing when you have a revocable living trust and all of these estate planning documents, it's a comprehensive plan together, is you have to then update all of these documents, but you have the ability to do that because you created it, right? And you said something earlier, it was, you never want to wait until that diagnosis comes in. You want to do it now. It is the saddest to have to go through with families to sit there when somebody has been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and their 4-year-old child is sitting at the table over here coloring as you are planning on your death, right? So for that parent having to go through that is horrible for them with everything else going on. And that's why if you can plan now while you're in good health, then it's going to make it so much easier that if something happens, you're ready.
With that, Crista, thank you so much for your expertise. Where can people find you and access your resources?
So you can find me on social, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, you can send me messages there. It's at Estate Planning Mom. You can also go to our website, iwannaprotectmyhome.com, and it'll get you to our website to be able to contact us.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll end here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.